Hey guys, I wanted to go over assignment number 6, Manner, Cause, Mechanism, and Time of Death. I've given you back your grades. I haven't marked up as to what you got right or wrong, but you can check your answers against this key, which I'll also post, and just follow through the video if you have any questions. So first off, let's remember that the body loses 1.4 degrees Fahrenheit per hour for the first 12 hours, and then after that it slows down to about 0.7 degrees per hour each hour after that. So that means, and this is an important thing to remember, that the body is going to lose a maximum of 16.8 degrees in the first hour. In the first 12 hours. These are the facts that you need to know. We're going to look at case number 1. An elderly man is found deceased in his apartment. His body temp is 91.6. So the first thing we need to do is determine the entire heat loss. So we're just going to subtract 98.6, subtract 91.6 from 98.6, so that gives us 7 degrees. That is the total heat loss. Because this is less than 16.8 degrees, we know this man has been dead for less than 12 hours. Therefore, we're just going to divide the 7-degree total heat loss by 1.4, the rate of heat lost in the first 12 hours, and that gives us a final answer of 5. Case number 2, it's asking you about that same elderly man and saying that maybe if he had been found outside in cold weather, would that have shortened or lengthened the time that we would have estimated? Well, if he's outside in cold weather, it means he's going to lose heat faster to the environment, so he was probably dead for less than the 5 hours. Case number 3, how long was a victim dead if the body temp was 85.2? Again, find your total heat loss. It's 85.2 degrees. Subtract from the average body temperature of 98.6, leaves us with 13.4 degrees Fahrenheit. That is the total heat loss. Again, it is less than 16.8. the amount lost in the first 12 hours, so we know this person's been dead less than 12 hours, so we simply divide the total heat loss by 1.4 degrees for each hour, and that tells us this person has been dead for 9.6 hours. Question number 4. It gets a little bit more complicated here because this person's been dead for a long time. So we calculate their total heat loss if their body temp is 50 degrees and figure out that they've lost 48.6 degrees. This is way more than 12 hours because remember, 16.8 is what you lose in the first 12 hours. We're going to take our total heat loss, which is subtract out the 16.8, which is how much we lost in the first 12 hours. All right, so that's we know that this person has already been dead for 12 hours. The remaining 31.8 is how much heat they lost after 12 hours. So we divide that by 0.7 degrees, okay? And that gives us another 45 hours. So we know the person lost 16.8 degrees in the first 12 hours. They lost 31 degrees in the remaining time, which we calculated to be 45 hours. You add up these 2 hours, and it gives you 57 hours. We go on to number 5. Again, this is another longer than 12 hours. We find our total heat loss of 30 degrees, 0.3. We're going to subtract out the 16.8, which is that first 12 hours, and it leaves us with 13.5. You divide your 13.5 by 0.7, the rate which is lost after 12 hours. That tells us that after they lost their first 16.8, when they lost this 13.5, that actually took 19 more hours. Add up the first 12 hours, the second 19 hours, and you get 31 hours total. Number 6, again, we have a heat loss of 23.8 degrees. It's more than 16.8. They've been longer dead than 12 hours. Subtract out your 16.8 or your first 12 hours. That gives you 7 degrees. Divide the 7 by 0.7, which is how much is lost each hour after the first 12. That gives us 10. Add those two together. First 12, second 10, it gives you 22 hours. Number 7 and 8 are super straightforward. They're both dead less than 12 hours. So find the total heat loss, divide by 1.4. Straight. Now, when we get to case 9 and 10, I'm just asking you to go about it from the answer to the heat loss. So in this case, if you've been dead for 7 hours, you're just going to multiply 7 times 1.4 to get the total heat loss, and then subtract that from the average body temperature, which gives us a temperature of 88.8 degrees Fahrenheit. Number 10, 18 hours after death, so we know we're going to have to use two separate calculations here. In the first 12 hours, they lost 16.8 degrees. We know that. There was 6 more hours, which is with a heat loss of 0.7 degrees per hour. That gives us a total heat loss in the second 6 hours of 4.2. You add these two heat losses together, which gives us 21 degrees Fahrenheit. Subtract that from the average body temperature, and that gives you an answer of 77.6 degrees. So now let's talk about manners of death. All right, gentlemen, I want to review this. The manner of death. There are only 5 manners of death. It is either suicide, homicide, natural, accidental, or undetermined. That is it. Those 5 things are the only types of manners of death. Then you remember that the cause of death is the thing that caused them to die. A car accident, a gunshot, a head injury, right? And then the mechanism is the physiological change that happened in their body. So let's look at this first one. And I talked about this in the other video. This woman was found dead on a boat floating in the middle of a lake. There's blunt force trauma to her forehead, and then some information about the weather. What killed her? Right, she's alone on a boat in the middle of a lake. She has a head injury. She fell. She might have been hit by the sail boom, what have you. So we're going to call her death and accident. And right here it says she has blunt force trauma to her head. So there's her cause. And then the mechanism, you put down something like brain bruising, head injury. I'm good with that. When we do our calculations, which I've been through enough, I'm not going to walk you through this one. It came out to a 46-hour time of death. And because the environment was very, very cold, and she's been out there for 46 hours, I'm going to say that probably the time was a little bit less. Even though she was all bundled up, she's still on a boat on a clear day, and it was windy. All of those things are going to suck heat away a lot faster. Okay, a woman is found dead in a stream above a ravine. A ravine is like a cliff. The cause of death is determined to be a fall from a nearby cliff. Well, there, I'm telling you what the cause of death. There is virtually no blood left in her body. What is the approximate time of death if her temperature is 84.9? Well, she fell off a ravine. That was an accident. All right. The cause of death is listed right here. It's the fall from the cliff. And because she has no blood left in her body, obviously she sustained some type of injury and bled out, and that is exsanguination. And then her body temperature gives us a time of death of 9.8 hours. Young man is at a fraternity house found at 7. He's naked, and there are signs of recent hazing, and including bruising on his wrists, ankles, and neck. His blood alcohol is 3 times the legal limit, and his stomach contents reveal large amounts of undigested alcohol. His trachea is scratched and bloody. He's found on the concrete floor. What is the TOD if his body temperature is 75 degrees? All right, gentlemen, I talked about this in the other video. Alcohol poisoning. This man died from alcohol poisoning. That was the cause of death. Now, the fact that he was obviously bruised around his wrists, ankles, and neck, this is telling me right here he'd been tied up, right, and possibly strangled or choked. But his blood alcohol being 3 times the legal limit, and his trachea, that's, what you breathe through, what you breathe through, is scratched and bloody. He probably vomited and injured himself in some fashion of that nature. So we're going to call this a homicide because he was at some point tied up. There was evidence of hazing. Even though there's no intent, the people didn't mean to kill him, most likely. He did die as a result of their actions. Alcohol poisoning is what killed him, and one of the mechanisms of alcohol poisoning death is respiratory failure. We've got a TOD of 22 hours, which is just horrible to think that this guy might have been dead in the frat house for a day before somebody found him. All right, number 14, a locked car that was left, a locked car in the garage that was idling. The heat was on. He was in his bathrobe. This guy killed himself. He went into a car, into his garage, left the car running in his bathrobe. It wasn't like he was planning on leaving or anything. We're going to call this a suicide, and it's carbon monoxide poisoning, which is a common way that people will commit suicide. And hypoxia is what kills you from carbon monoxide poisoning. His TOD is 6 hours. And our last one, this one's pretty straightforward. The police are called after hearing screaming. There's a large pool of blood. She's got defensive wounds and 3 large lacerations. So we're calling this a homicide. It's stabbing or cutting, and she died of exsanguination relatively recently. All right, gents, you have any questions? You know where to find me. Office hours are Tuesday and Thursday at 11 and 1, depending on which day it is. Check the calendar or shoot me an email. Have a great weekend.